Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the sales webinar series that we conduct here at the Ball State Center for Professional Selling. My name is Deva Rangarajan. I'm the director of the Sales Center and your host. Today, I'm thrilled to actually have a very, very interesting professional, Mr. Paul Liberatore, from the director of sales enablement for the Americas at Tricentis, which is a software as a service company. But he comes with a lot of experience in the domain of sales enablement, having worked for a sales enablement platform company as well as working for what you would normally associate a lot of sales enablement initiatives with, especially a company in a B2B space selling physical products, not necessarily in the tech space that you kind of associate sales enablement with. So Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to our audience.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Deva.
Paul, so one of the things which struck me is the concept of sales enablement. And when I take a look at your career in sales enablement, and what struck me was in your previous job, at Welch Allen, a medical devices company, you actually you came up with sales enablement in a company that was not necessarily having the term before.
Correct.
So, yeah, and tell me what made you do that. Essentially, it's a risk, right? Because suddenly once you put a particular role or a title there, now it's going to be the target of many people within the organization. You're going to be held to a lot of exacting standards. So tell me about how you went about doing that and why you did that.
Yeah, so I have a background in instructional design, and I have been working prior to joining Welch Allen. I've been doing a lot of training, talent management, talent development. And honestly, my experience has always been, has frequently been that training was brought in when there was a performance issue after trying to install some software to fix it. So in other words, there's a desired performance output, management isn't seeing it, they go shopping for a tool, they install a tool, that doesn't fix it. So then the next step is, well, we better train people because obviously, they need training. And, after a few times experiencing this, I quickly realized that process engineering model was the best fit for really helping performance improvement. So that's people, process, and tools. So certainly training is a part of the equation under people, helping people, but also so is recruiting the right people, so is giving the right information, rewarding them appropriately. Process has a lot to do with it. So if you're asking people to do things that are inefficient or in other ways compromise their ability or their motivation to do something because of process issues, the process needs to be straightened out. And then certainly tools can be brought to bear as well. But the wrong tools or rolling tools out poorly without good training and getting people acclimated to the tool and helping them understand the benefits to them, essentially driving change management, then tools alone aren't going to fix it. So the original job that I took with the sales department at Welch Allen was manager of sales training. And that lasted for about a year when I did go to my boss and then his boss and basically say, there's more to this than just training the sales team. If we really want to get the changes and the business results that you're looking for, we need to move into more of an enablement model. And I basically explained the three legs of the stool to them and just said, to be effective, I need to help iron out the pre-sales and sales and post-sales processes. I need to streamline that. I need to integrate these processes with the tool set. I need to help with recruiting. So really just driving an overall holistic enablement approach as opposed to just focusing on new hire training, sales onboarding, 90-day onboarding plans, new product training, sales kickoff, right? Those are the things that people traditionally think of with sales enablement. So to me, that's certainly important, but that's just one leg of the stool.
That's fantastic. It's really very interesting because a lot of the companies that we have a chance to talk with, at least in my day-to-day interactions, are not in the tech space. And for them, anytime we talk about sales enablement and we talk about training, they say, so it's nothing new. It's pretty much trying to repackage this, but they forget to realize that there's a lot more to it than just pure training. And that's one of the things that is always going to still be a challenge for a lot of people with the term sales enablement in traditional manufacturing, industrial kind of organizations.
Right.
And I think that's why I'm really interested, because you're one of the first people that I'm interviewing who's not from a platform. So we've had previous webinars with people who actually manage the platforms, but to have a customer talk about it is really cool. Now, one of the things you talked about was you talked about people, process, and tools, right? And one of the processes could also be how your salespeople, when they go talk to the customers, and now I'm linking it back to some of the findings from the Challenger sale, where they talk about the fact that the customers have done a lot of the homework online. Now, whether you buy into it or not is a different story, but the truth is your customers are increasingly more well prepared. You have more number of people out there. And so there is also an onus on a responsibility on marketing. I'm not necessarily talking about marketing as an organization structures its marketing. I'm talking about the concept of marketing, that is trying to come up with the collateral that is relevant to help the salespeople. Now, where does marketing fit into your people, process, and tools framework?
Yeah, certainly, in a couple of different aspects. One of the terms, and I believe that this was a term that I got from a training session I attended, was then the Corporate Executive Board, which is now part of Gartner.
Yeah.
But they call it, they talk about commercial insights. So one of the things that, one of the assets that a good seller wants to be able to provide are commercial insights. And commercial insights are basically insights that cause potential buyer, motivates them to buy, right? So it's more than just an aha moment. It's more than just best practices or sort of standard industry knowledge. It's not just, wow, that's a really good idea. It's, wow, that makes me think I need to do something. I need to make a change. I need to make a purchase. Maybe not in so many words, but you're essentially motivating somebody to make a change. So a couple of different points come in there. One is certainly that information should be curated and available to a salesperson, and then they need to be able to access it, right? So there's a process piece, right? There's curating the information, and then putting it somewhere to make it accessible. And then there's a tool piece to it, right? So whether we're delivering that with a sales enablement platform, or we're just using SharePoint, or we're emailing it, right? There are a lot of different ways to do it, high tech and low tech, but it's got to be available to them. And then there's a person aspect to it, right? They have to be what I would call audible ready, right? They've got to be able to participate in a conversation, ask the right questions, and then understand which commercial insights to bring to bear and how to deliver them and the right timing to deliver them. So, emotional intelligence, listening skills, questioning skills. So, I've certainly been accused of overcomplicating things, but that's the reason why I approach everything with this process model, because to me, I can't just train somebody, right, on discovery questioning and active listening. That alone won't do the job. I can't just give them a sales enablement platform with a bunch of commercial insights in there, because they won't necessarily know how to use them or when to use them. And those things won't populate themselves. So there's got to be some process to get them in there. So to me, everything kind of has to combine all three of those, has to at least touch all three of those categories.
Because the reason why I asked the question is that when I remember a couple of platforms just came out, and it was mostly their actual people point of contact in a customer's organization was not necessarily the sales force, was actually the marketing teams, right? And this is particularly the focus after the 2012, the end of solution sales, which is part of the Challenger sales book. So suddenly now marketing starts thinking, okay, we need to have more collateral. We need to be doing more stuff because your customers are doing their homework online. And we started seeing a lot of this kind of uncurated content that you would find in a sales enablement platform. Now, the focus, as you rightly pointed out, was on tools without necessarily taking into understanding how the process works in a sales process. To what extent do you actually think that that is where the sales enablement manager or the professional is slightly different from sales training, because that curation of the content that you're going to have from marketing to carefully tailor it to the salesperson per vertical, per stage in the sales/buying process is critical. So what extent do you think that there's a difference between just a training manager as against a sales enablement manager?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I know there is a lot of, I don't know if I'd call it confusion or just, people tend to use the terms interchangeably, but I think one of the benefits of really, maybe not starting, but having a lot of experience in an FDA regulated industry like med device was we had to be very specific and clear. So let me just say, for example, crowdsourced information and crowd curated information really wasn't something as a medical device manufacturer, an FDA regulated company, that we could just put into our enablement platform, right? So we couldn't just have a group of customers or several salespeople say, hey, this is, I've found that using this medical device this way is actually a good way to set it up or clean it or use it. It needs to be, and we were very diligent, and that organization continues to be diligent about vetting anything that was in the platform, because obviously patient safety is of the utmost concern. So you can't just crowdsource information. So I think that was a good place for me to really break into sales enablement platforms and curating content, because even though I've moved to industries that are less regulated, I think, to answer your question more specifically, a sales trainer, even if they're responsible for designing the content, a sales trainer is going to typically work with subject matter experts, product experts, key stakeholders, whether it's sales leadership. They're going to put together an agenda, an outline. They're going to develop material. You've got some time to really get your training together, and time varies depending on the urgency, but typically you've got a little bit of time. Sales enablement, because it's so much broader, or should be so much broader. Sales training is a part of what you do, but this whole stream of curating content and making sure that it's accurate, making sure you're meeting whatever guidelines. I mean, the financial industry also has many regulations, right? So if you're in any kind of regulated industry, transportation, aeronautics, right, government, military, those, etc., you really have to be on top of what you're delivering, and you have to do it really at a very fast pace.
Indeed. But I think one of the things which I'm hearing you say as well, or maybe this is my understanding of what you're also saying, or what's obvious to you, is there's also the speed as well, right? Because one of the things we do not talk about as a sales trainer, that's what my takeaway from this as well, is that a sales trainer has a little bit of time or more time, depending upon what it is. They have templates that are kind of established, particular ways of doing it and bringing it into the classroom or whatever the blended learning is. But curating content, especially where information is rapidly evolving or things are changing rapidly, would also call for a specific capability within a firm to actually take a look at that information. It could be that your marketing does it, but then marketing does not do it from the viewpoint of helping sales. They're doing it from the viewpoint of, okay, correct me that information. The sales trainer is going to be preoccupied by working with other people and trying to make sure how to bring the content, but the exact content plus what is not in a training, what can be used as a collateral during a visit, is something that regulated industries, it helps, but the learning from that could also be applied to any normal industry, correct? So essentially the sales enablement person then becomes a kind of the bridge.
Yeah, I think a bridge is a great term. That's a term I've often used when talking to product and engineering and marketing. And I think, this is a bit of a generalization, because I certainly have been, I've walked into work, literally at 7:30 with one idea of what I was going to do that day, and then found myself quickly storyboarding, scripting, and shooting a training video because there was a big change, right? So I think for all those folks who do sales training out there, you probably can identify with that. You do sometimes get urgent calls where there's a day or two, 1 or 2 days turnaround to get something produced and out, especially in the world of e-learning and videos. However, having said that, at least from my personal experience, the normal cadence is, okay, once a month we run sales onboarding training. Once we get the agenda pretty well set and we know who's presenting, when they're presenting, and the decks are pretty well set, right? It's a matter of logistics, coordinating presenters, facilitating the training, and running it. But you kind of get a good cadence down that you can manage, right? So it's important, but it isn't. It doesn't have that same clip to it. Product training can be different. That's the instance I was talking about where there was a quick turnaround because of a product update. However, typically, even in some of the technology organizations I've worked for with rapid release rates, engineers and product and project managers like to run things on a project schedule. Yeah. So again, building a bridge, part of my goal is always to have connections with the product and engineering teams so that I know when product updates are coming. So I'm not surprised 2 days before release that we need to train the sales force.
Indeed.
So I think that that's certainly part of it. Whereas, for example, just a week or two ago, the Gartner Magic Quadrant was updated, and our organization was for the 5th year in a row in the leader quadrant. That was something that came from marketing, and we needed to get that information out very quickly because Q4, it's a huge win for us, and it's a great differentiator. So you're not going to wait around for the next training session or sales kickoff to roll that out.
Fantastic.
Quickly coordinate with product marketing. You organize your thoughts. Maybe they do put the content together. You set up the, in our case, a conference call and review the data, and then talk through the strategies for how to use that great information to close business in Q4 and moving forward. So, and we may be drawing too fine of a line between what is curating content and what is training. So, I don't mean to go down that path, but to me, that was a great instance of having a partnership with product marketing, getting some information, knowing it was pretty urgent, and not sitting on it to develop the perfect training session. Just, you put the deck together, I'll arrange the logistics, we'll collaborate on how to fold this into our selling methodology, and we'll basically team teach on a conference call in a day or two and get this information out.
Because for me, from what I'm hearing you say, as you rightly pointed out, for me, the idea what I'm looking at is product marketing, which has its own page. The product is not going to change a lot. So you need to bring that concept of the product to the customers as well. The salespeople have to bring it. Then, of course, you have market things happening, which is what is the competition doing? What is the regulation saying? So they're bringing that information as well. Then you have a sales trainer who's trying to say how to bring this information in. So what I'm assuming what you're trying to say is that you're trying to package all of the things relevant. And it's very interesting. What I'm taking away from this is that if done well, the role of the sales enabler is not just a bridge, but also to say, yes, I have product knowledge. Now I know the sales methodology. I know what is happening in the market. Now I'm going to bring it into a kind of a customized messaging to my salespeople. That is the equivalent of what CEB called customer insights, because the product marketer or a product manager is going to be looking only from the viewpoint of a product. I'm not saying that they don't think about the customers, but they're talking about that. The marketing person, as we described it here, could just be focused on, okay, here is what it is. How can we use it in our websites and make a lot of publicity? But hey, here is Paul doing sales enablement. Hey, if this helps you, why don't you use this? So Paul takes us up, understands that together with the sales methodology, this is where we are. This is where it fits into it. So Paul says, okay, remember this product feature we talked about? Remember what stage in the sales methodology we're talking about? And here is how you can actually use this market insight to actually create value for the customer. So that role becomes extremely critical. I'm not saying that you need to have a person doing it, but somebody should be doing it. And
Right.
and if not, you really have to trust your salespeople to be able to pull all of these things together and be able to sell. Am I right in understanding this?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I used to refer to outside in development, right? So
Mhm.
um, we would spend, there were two of us at that time on the team, and we would spend about 20 to 25% of our time in the field with salespeople. And even though um, the the nature of my role has evolved since those early days, I still spend as much time with and listening to and working with salespeople, because I think one of the things that I do as a sales enablement professional is represent the salesperson internally, right? So when I'm in meetings with marketing and product, I want to I want to have enough empathy with the salespeople so that I can ask the questions that if they were just handed this information, just handed this deck, they would ask it themselves. So I basically want to take as much noise out of the system as possible, um, and manage the message to the sales force so that it is immediately applicable and consumable with as little training is needed as possible, as little translation from marketing or engineering speak to sales speak as possible. I want to do my best to help salespeople concentrate on what they're good at, what they're paid for, which is communicating to customers on value, understanding customers' needs, and helping customers get someplace they couldn't get to on their own, and minimize the amount of time that they have to spend reading technical information, figuring out what jargon or slang means, acronyms, um, trying to connect the dots between what an engineering spec says a product does and what a customer says they need a product to do. I want to connect those things, connect those dots, so that salesperson basically gets the new product launch package and is pretty much ready to hit the road and start selling it. So that I think that's maybe another difference between enablement and just training. Just having a product expert, somebody from marketing, somebody from product, somebody from engineering do the training. I've been in those sessions. I've seen engineers come in and train salespeople on a product, and it can quickly get into the weeds on the technical aspects of the product. And the salespeople typically like it because they want to know every detail they can. They don't want to ever be stumped by a question. So if a customer asks how you change this or clean that or whatever, they like to know that information. But the real important piece is, well, why would I change this? How often do I need to clean it to ensure I get the results that I'm looking for, right? So a good salesperson has to take that information and turn it into something that actually matters to a customer, to an economic buyer. Why would I write a check for this?
Yeah.
I'm not going to write a check for it because, I can easily change it from one mode to another. I might write a check for it because I need to quickly move from one mode to another, and your product helps me do that more efficiently, more effectively, more cost effectively with less staff, right? So those are the things that I do. I listen to all that information and say, okay, what's this mean to a customer, and how can a salesperson fit this into our message?
Now, if I were to ask you, Paul, is now that you worked in Welch Allen in a very product-driven kind of organization for
Mm-hmm.
quite some time, and now you work for a software as a service kind of organized, technology-based organization, where do you think are some differences between a tech space as against a much more product industrial machine type of business? If there is any difference at all.
Well, there definitely is. I mean, when you work for a company that manufactures anything, it could be med device. I've worked for forklift manufacturers. I worked for pump manufacturers, right? So, no doctor says to him or herself, I'm going to build my own blood pressure cuff. Like I don't need anybody to do that. I can put a hook a pump up to a Ziploc bag and wrap it right. Nobody does that. With software, companies of just about any size, certainly medium to large companies, enterprise organizations, have an IT department. They typically have people who can code. When you're selling software as a service, one of your main competitors is do it yourself, right? So when you walk in and you say, hey, we have a platform that does this, invariably you're selling, one of your stakeholders is from IT, and they're maybe thinking, well, I've got a couple of developers I can put on that. Like we could have that in a year. Why would I pay this company X amount, in licensing fees when we'll have some build costs, but then it'll be, zero cost after that. So, so that's a key difference, I think, with technology. The other thing is this is just from my perspective, having come from, product manufacturing background, it's less tangible, right? So when you're selling software, you're basically talking about problems and solutions without a concrete object to actually show them. I'm going to do a software demo. I'm going to show people. I'm going to ask them to imagine, this is them. I may even do a pilot. I may even say, here are 5 licenses to my program. Go ahead and use it. But in order to really close a deal in the software or the technology space, the economic buyer has to be, really in any space, the economic buyer has to be convinced that what you're doing is actually making the difference. It's the reason I'm going to make a check out to your company, because I can't do it myself and your competitors don't do it as well as you do it. Yeah. So that's why they decide to go with it. With a hardware organization with a medical device or a forklift, that's pretty easy to show. I mean, nobody's going to pick up a big heavy pallet and put it 20 feet in the air without a forklift. So that's pretty direct, pretty concrete of a concept. With software, we could run tests. We have software testers right on staff. We don't need your software program. Right. So it's much harder to demonstrate that value. And that's why I think the sales process is so much more important, because, helping the customer to understand what issues they have, what the gap is, what the delta is between their current state and the desired state, and to quantify that into business outcomes that they can actually realize and measure. Once you've gotten them that far, you'll know, right? They'll either be saying, you know what, you're right. There's a delta between where we are and where we should be, and it's costing my business something. I'm interested in learning about your solution. Or they're going to say, we've got a room full of 50 software testers. Everything's good. No need to change it. That's just, we're going to continue to do software testing the way we've done it. Okay, we know early. We'll move on. You'll move on. Maybe next year when your app doesn't launch on time, or your transportation system crashes right before the big holiday rush, or you miss something in the testing and now there's a liability. Maybe that'll be a compelling event that will have you coming back to us and looking at a different way of doing it. But for right now, there isn't. So it's definitely harder, I would say, with software.
And I think what you're saying is that, and tell me what you think about this as well, because the more I hear you say this, it's sort of making things a little bit more clear in my head as well, is that when we're talking about a lot of the software tech companies, essentially what you're talking about is that the customer is also going to do their homework, because if they're probably thinking to themselves, well, if I just want to see whether I have the in-house capability myself or not, and so essentially they're going to do a lot more homework rather than in the case of others. So essentially, I think what I'm hearing from you saying it, or what I'm taking away from that, is that not only is the customer going to say, I'm going to do it myself, I want to try it myself, but they're also going to start saying, if I'm going to be paying for something that I think I can do myself, why don't I do my homework before, so that Anybody who's going to come and tell me, I can ask them more relevant questions to help me make that choice. And that for me is what is the difference between going into a typical kind of other kinds of industrial situations, or in the case of medical devices, where they do know that they cannot necessarily do it themselves, and you can talk about it. But I think what you said about the fact that this intangible nature is also what many pump manufacturers, many industrial manufacturers are beginning to realize, because their products are becoming commoditized.
Mhm.
And when they have to sell value added services, that their salespeople struggle. And then they go into, but luckily for them, the customers are not as aware as in the case of the tech space. So as long as the customer is not aware, because we did some research and this 57% of a buying decision is made, was not something that we found very common in many industrial companies, in the purchasers and everything else. Yes, they do their homework, but only to a certain extent. The rest
Right.
is they still expect the salespeople to come in and do their argument.
Right.
Whereas if I'm taking a look, so essentially your explanation of the intangible is sort of put things in perspective in terms of how this is. I have two more questions for you, Paul, and then
Okay.
the first question I have is the following. So now this is based on, let's say, for example, what is your advice going to be for some intrapreneur in an organization who realizes the way we are set up right now is not helping our sales organization? Yes, we have great product marketing. Yes, we have great real marketing, as in understanding what's happening in the outside world and what are we doing in terms of search engine optimization, all those kind of things that we're talking about.
Mhm.
How do I go about convincing my organization that we actually need a capability called sales enablement? The reason why I'm not saying it as a role is that it could be that one person might take on two. So it's
Right.
the capability that I'm focusing on.
Yeah. No, and that's valid, because often organizations phase into full sales enablement departments. You're basically selling, right? It's I think of Daniel Pink's book, To Sell is Human, right?
Yeah.
So, and just using the methodology I'm used to, it's beginning to have the conversation with your leadership and their leadership and key stakeholders about the current state, right? So where are we today, and what's actually happening, right? So you need to get really clear on, if I take the presumption that my suspicions are accurate, we're not where we need to be. Our margins aren't high enough. Our close rate isn't high enough. Our cycle time is too long. We're just not hitting revenue. Then it almost becomes like certainly another project, if not another almost full-time job of determining current state. What are those negative consequences? What things are happening? And then how would we turn it around, and what kind of business results would we see, and how would we measure it? And then having that conversation with leadership and key stakeholders, essentially painting the picture of, where we are today, the repercussions with, as I said, cycle time, margins, et cetera. And then how I think we could improve things, and what I believe the results would be, and how we'll measure it. That's essentially how I moved from just doing sales training to sales enablement, because we knew we wanted to make a change from kind of a relationship seller model to more of a quote unquote challenger model.
Yeah.
And I knew that just pulling the sales team in and doing some training, all by itself, that would not change behavior. And that was essentially the case that I made, but I used that format.
Yeah. Now, the last question I actually have is this. So let us say, Welch Allen was a much bigger company. Tricentis, the way you work right now, is a smaller company. So what would your advice be for a person who's beginning a sales enablement directive in a well-established organization? It's part A, part B. And what would be the kind of things they should keep in mind when they're starting out for a smaller organization with maybe 100 sales reps as against with 2,000, 3,000 sales reps?
It's interesting. I mean, if I just take those 2 points in my career, there are so many differences organizationally between Welch-Allyn and Tricentis. Welch-Allyn is an over 100-year-old company, and Tricentis is, not startup terms. It's not young, but it's certainly not 100 years old, and around 500 employees globally. But I certainly have worked for smaller startups. There was an Austin-based phone technology company that was really just a few years old. I think they were in Series C funding, Series B, and then I got Series C funding when I got there. And that was a small sales force, and I was a department of one, really just trying to do everything. And I guess so. The key difference is, so they both have their challenges and they both have their upsides. The challenges for working for a larger, older, more established company certainly is fighting against inertia, right? So. The old cliche of we've always done things this way. Larger organizations tend to have, for lack of a better term, this isn't really necessarily specific to any place I've worked, but you always have people who have their safety zone, right? Their area, their domain that they're in charge of, and asking them to make a change may be threatening to them. I guess you'd get that in any organization, but it tends to be magnified and compounded in larger organizations with years and years of tradition and history. With smaller organizations, your challenges are really, how do I stop putting out fires and actually do something strategic? Because you're doing everything. You're doing new hire training. You're helping with battle cards. You're updating the sales enablement platform. You're building out a 90-day plan. It's just to try to get to the strategic projects. You really need to manage your time effectively because the urgent will always outweigh the important. So, that certainly is an issue or a challenge with smaller organizations. The benefits of working in a larger organization is, there tends to be more structure. The processes are often harder to revise processes. Because again, they've sort of been traditionalized, memorialized, and kind of set in, maybe not stone, but pretty well set. But you have a lot more structure. There's a true HR department. There's a true regulatory department. There are loads of people to handle the work. Again, that can slow things down, but at least there's a structure to it. The benefit of working in a smaller organization is you really can put your mark on the business. You really can make a substantial amount of change and improvement very quickly. If you are comfortable with ambiguity and you're comfortable with a little bit of chaos, to me, there's so much more that you can do in a smaller organization, technology company, startup. It's a little riskier, but there's so much more impact that you can have on the organization as opposed to being, kind of one cog in the machine of a large organization.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your insights with us. It's been very, very interesting and insightful. So I wish you all the best. I wish you all the best as you progress in your job at Tricentis.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, and stay tuned to the next edition of the webinar series.